So they grow fairly
I'm not
fast.
saying it's David Letterman and Jack Hanna, but like we're your morning show equivalent. Joined by Jacob Weber from the K-State Research and Extension Office. Jacob, thank you so much. It's Wildcat Wednesday. We've got live animals in the studio.
We do.
We've got bagworms. Jacob, it's one of those things where it seems like you look at the trees in your yard one day and you walk out the next day and you go, where did they come from?
That's right.
How do they get so big so fast?
That's because they're there and they're eating and they're constantly feeding. What we typically look at on a bagworm is probably can't see this very well from the TV unless we zoom in. This is what we typically think of as a bagworm. This is from last year. There probably was a female insect in here last year.
Okay.
And she laid maybe up to 1,000 eggs inside that bag.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't ever leave the bag. And out of those 1,000 eggs, maybe 500 have emerged. And they hatch in the spring. This is a one-year life cycle, so
okay.
We're not going to get any more hatching this year. This is what they look like right now. This little tiny little thing right here at the end of my fingertip, that's a new bagworm. And that's where they are right now. There's about a dozen of those on this particular branch.
And talk
here.
about the growth that you've seen on this particular limb in the span of a week.
In about, I checked this tree a week ago, and these are now about a half time larger than they were a week ago. And they'll grow fairly quickly. About the middle of July is when they really start doing a lot of damage to the plant. Right now, they're so small that their damage is very minimal. Mm-hmm. But as they get larger, they consume more foliage, and the last what we call instar or phase, growth phase of the particular caterpillar, that's what's inside here is a little caterpillar. They really consume a lot of foliage. And they can just literally overwhelm this tree. I did a little calculation yesterday.
We got
of a bagworm potential for growth. If we start out with one female bag like this a year ago in the spring, okay, and she produces 500 offspring, mm-hmm, out of those 500 offspring, let's say 400 survive, okay, and half of those are going to be female. So half of them the following year are going to produce offspring. You can go from one bag in 1 year to 40,000 worms
the next
year.
Once we identify it, number one, can it be fatal to our trees?
It's damaging. Rarely are they fatal to trees,
okay,
but in landscape situations they can do a lot of damage to the point where the landscape plant is not going to be worth keeping. They are particularly fond of junipers, arborvitae, mm-hmm, which is a very common evergreen shrub planted in the landscape, and spruce trees. They love spruce trees, and they'll consume the foliage. What makes a spruce tree very attractive is if it keeps its foliage up to 10 years, and it's very full looking. Bagworms can remove most of that foliage, and then you have just it looks like a stick. So we really, in landscapes, and windbreaks is where we like to control these, and they're very easily controlled.
Let's talk about control. That's the biggest question I get.
This is the time now.
Okay, so we've identified we have them. How are we getting rid of them?
Well, a thorough insecticide spray. Now, some folks that don't like to use sprays, you can hand pick. How are you going to hand pick 1,000? 1,500.
No, thank you. I can spray. I'm good.
They're very tiny right now, so it's very difficult. So we use an insecticide to control them. And there are certain types of insecticides that we want to use. We want to use something that has a little bit of residual, because bagworms are going to get the insecticide only if they consume it. Okay. They'll have to eat the foliage. The insecticide has to be on the foliage. Now, I've talked.
You can't just spray them and they fall off. They have to ingest it.
They won't fall off. They'll ingest it, but they'll remain attached to the plant, but they'll be dead. Types of insecticides, those that contain bifenthrin and permethrin, are fairly good to use. Some folks have sprayed their plants with malathion, which is more of a contact insecticide. It's not a residual. It does kind of work, but it's not thorough enough that it will kill all the insects on the plant, because some of them are not feeding, and the insecticide malathion disappears after about 5 or 6 hours. It's pretty much not effective anymore. So a good residual type insecticide, one thorough spray. It has to be with sufficient water volume in the spray to get the plant thoroughly saturated, because the bagworms are dispersed throughout the entire plant. We got to get the material on the entire plant, at least the foliage part.
So if you have any questions about what pesticide to use, you're going to call Jacob. You're going to call the K-State Extension Service office, and he's going to help you control your bagworms. I have a quick story for you that you won't remember.
Okay.
The very first time we met, it wasn't even on TV. I asked you as part of the Wildcat Extension District to come look at some trees a family member had because we had a bagworm problem, and you came out and you helped me.
Okay, very good.
Years ago.
It's been a while.
There you go. Give Jacob a go. Jacob, I want to thank you for coming in. We'll have more KOAM Morning News for you right after this.